So, Abe, did we get any other questions?
We do, Caesar. Actually have a couple really good questions that we'd like to bring up.
Shoot.
The first one is from Thomas. Okay, Thomas asks, do you suggest transitioning veterans avoid government housing right up until departure? Seems like sooner you pay all bills, the better. Some disagree, however. I've heard arguments both ways. Do you have any thoughts on that, Caesar?
What was the first part of it? I think you read it too fast for me.
Are there suggestions for transitioning veterans about avoiding government housing right up until their departure? The argument is that the sooner you pay all bills, the better. Some, however, disagree. What are your thoughts on should veterans be avoiding government housing and making sure they're all paid up on their bills before they transfer, or transition rather?
I'm not sure I understand the question correctly, so maybe if Tom is still online, he could expand on it. When I think of government housing, I'm thinking of Section 8 housing. So subsidized housing, right? Housing vouchers and government assistance. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's talking about government housing as in military housing.
Yeah, like on a base.
Right.
Right.
Should you wait on military-based housing before, up until the last minute? So while we see if he clarifies that question, I'll answer assuming military housing. So if you're in military housing and you think that that's a better option, it's a tough question to ask. Should you avoid military housing? Because again, the financial position of each veteran is different. The family composition of each veteran is different. Their rank, their location, their status, their time to retirement or to their next contract is different. So it all depends on where you are. I know it sounds like I'm avoiding the question, but it's not a simple answer. Let me give you one example. Let's say an E5 sergeant for the Marine Corps, a petty officer in the Navy, is in base housing, has 2 kids, and they're living in Monterey, California. Very expensive place to live. You couldn't afford to buy a house or even rent the same size house in an area like that. Now I purposely picked a high COLA area to show my point that in that case, it makes sense to stay in military housing. But in a place where, say, Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, where you have a lower cost of living and a better opportunity to buy or rent a house for a bigger space, I'd say go for it. I'm an avid real estate investor. Anybody who knows me knows that I love real estate. And my favorite hobby is talking about real estate. If I'm driving down the road and I see a sign that says for sale, I want to go in that house. So I'm biased in my opinion that if you can, as a military veteran, regardless of all these possible scenarios that I give you, if you can, whenever you can, buy a house. Your VA loan gives you that benefit to buy a house with 0 down. That is a tremendous benefit that nobody else has. So you could avoid military housing if you can buy a house to leverage your BAH, which is your basic allowance for housing, and pocket some of that money to cover bills and further your position financially. But again, I'm not sure if that's what our friend Thomas meant.
Yeah, Thomas actually did clarify. He did mean military housing. So a lot of military personnel, they never leave it until they do transition out of their service. And how does that affect their idea of the budget now? Because it's a different budget when you're using military housing.
So I think that Thomas's point brings up another very key issue. Sometimes we get used to the military housing, and maybe that's where he's going, that he has probably experienced that either in his unit or himself, where he's seen people, staying in base housing up until the last minute, and they never really understood their budget for a true financial picture as to what it takes to run a household outside of the military base. That's a great point, Thomas. Thank you for bringing that up. And you're absolutely right. And thank you for contributing, because your point is valid. And if you were here, I could hear you talking to me and saying, help veterans understand that the sooner they leave base housing, the better they can adapt to the real world, the real bills, the real life, the real commute. So I think that's probably what his point is in this aspect. And I think that's critical, especially for our younger veterans who do 4 years or 6 years, and they like the benefit and the ease of military-based housing, especially with a young spouse and little children. It seems convenient to be in one little neighborhood that's protected, it's on base, and it's good. And it is a great benefit, don't get me wrong. And it's meant to be that way. But if you're thinking about transition, you should also think about transitioning out of military housing. I give a shout out to Thomas, because that was a great point.
Yes,
Thanks
excellent.
for doing that, Thomas. Hope to see you next week too, to join us and support us with more great points.
That's
Great point.
Yep.